Welcome to the Velvet Myth. I'm your host, Adam, and I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend this quiet moment with me. As you settle in and begin to drift toward sleep, I hope this story arrives just as all the best things do. Softly, gently, and exactly when it's needed most. It was created with great care, and my sincerest wish is that it brings you comfort, calm, and restful sleep tonight. And if, by morning, you find yourself feeling a little lighter, a little more refreshed, I'd be delighted to hear from you. Knowing that you are here, sharing this moment with me, even through a few simple words, means more than I can say. But that's for tomorrow. Right now, there's nothing to do and nowhere to be. So let yourself settle. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. Loosen your hands. And allow your whole body to feel the weight of the bed beneath you. Take one slow breath in and let it go. And one more, breathing in ease and releasing whatever the day left behind. You don't need to stay awake for any of this. Simply listen for as long as feels right and drift off the moment you're ready. There's no wrong way to do this. Now close your eyes and let the story begin. The path had been long. Not difficult exactly, not steep or treacherous, but long in the way that all journeys become long toward their end, when the body has given most of what it had, and the mind has grown quiet from the giving. The traveller moved slowly up the final rise, feet finding the worn stones of the path with a kind of grateful familiarity, as if the hill itself had been expecting this arrival and had made the way soft on purpose. The silver birch trees thinned as the path climbed. Their pale trunks had been companions for some time now, standing in the mist on either side like quiet sentinels, their small leaves catching moonlight and holding it, releasing it, catching it again in a gentle, breathing shimmer. The traveller had stopped counting the minutes some time ago. There was only the path and the cool night air carrying its faint green smell of moss and deep forest earth, and the mist curling in low ribbons across the ground. And somewhere ahead, there, above the last curve of the hill, the castle. The traveller paused. It rose from the hilltop with the patient permanence of something that had always been there. Ancient stone, pale as cream in the moonlight, its towers reaching upward without urgency into the dark blue sky. Ivy climbed its walls in slow cascades, and in its windows, scattered here and there, irregular as stars, light glowed. Not the sharp white light of the waking world, but something warmer and older than that. Something amber, something gold. The windows held their light the way a cupped hand holds a candle flame, carefully, softly, as if aware of how precious the warmth was. The traveller let out a breath they had not quite known they were holding. The gate was iron, old and ornate, threaded through with vines that had long since grown into the metalwork until it was difficult to say where the iron ended and the living green began. But before the traveller could raise a hand toward it, a light appeared on the other side. A small brass lantern carried low, glowing with that same steady amber warmth as the castle windows. And behind the lantern, a figure. Ilara moved without hurry, That was the first thing the traveller noticed. Not her face, not her lantern, but the quality of her movement. The way she walked across the courtyard stones as if time were entirely hers, as if nothing had ever needed to happen faster than this. She wore a gown the deep green of old forests, its wide sleeves drifting slightly as she walked, and her chestnut hair, silver-streaked, loosely braided, lay over one shoulder like something resting. She reached the gate and drew it open with a sound that was less a creak than a sigh. "You've arrived," she said. Her voice was low, unhurried, shaped around the words gently, the way water shapes itself around smooth stones. Not a greeting so much as a quiet recognition, as if the traveller's coming had been known and waited for and welcomed long before tonight. The traveller stepped through the gate. Ilara's amber eyes moved over them once, warm and without judgment, taking in the wind-swept hair, the cloak still holding the night's chill in its fibres, the pleasant heaviness around the eyes. Then she set her lantern down on a low stone ledge and reached out with both hands. "Here," she said simply. "Let me take that." The traveller shrugged the wool cloak from their shoulders and felt it lifted away, and with it, somehow, something else lifted too. Some carried weight that had no name. The cold that had been sitting across the shoulders like a familiar burden dissolved into the night air, and what replaced it was warmth. The warmth of the courtyard, of the castle exhaling gently around them, of the lantern light falling across old stone in patterns of gold. Ilara folded the cloak over one arm with the same unhurried care she gave to everything. Then she picked up her lantern and turned toward the main door, a great arched door of dark wood, banded with iron, standing open the smallest amount, a soft light pressing out through the narrow gap like an invitation. "Come," Ilara said, glancing back once, her expression quietly certain. "There's no need to hurry. The castle has been waiting." The traveller followed, and behind them the gate swung closed, and the mist settled, and the night outside grew still. The door closed behind them with a sound like a held breath finally released. Not a slam, not even a click, but a soft, definitive hush that sealed the night outside and left only stillness in its place. The traveller stood for a moment, simply breathing it in. The corridor stretched ahead, long and gently curved, its stone walls the colour of old honey where the candlelight touched them, fading to a soft shadow blue farther along where the light grew thin. Beeswax tapers lined both walls in iron holders, dozens of them, their flames burning without flicker in the perfectly still air. Between the candles, long polished wooden tables ran the length of the passage, their surfaces holding small arrangements of dried herbs, smooth river stones, and ceramic bowls that reflected the light back in warm amber curves. Everything was orderly and unhurried, as if this corridor had been laid out with great care and then left alone for years to simply be. Ilara paused beside a deep niche in the wall, a rounded alcove no larger than a window seat, filled entirely with candles of varying heights, all burning, steady and warm. She turned and looked at the traveller with her quiet amber eyes. "Come and warm your hands," she said. "You've carried the cold of the road with you longer than you realize." The traveller stepped forward and raised their hands near the gathered flames. The warmth reached them immediately, not sharp or startling, but gentle, like stepping from shadow into afternoon sun. It moved slowly through the fingers, into the palms, and travelled in soft waves up through the wrists and arms, and something in the shoulders, something that had been quietly braced for hours, perhaps longer, began, almost imperceptibly, to lower. Ilara waited without impatience, her lantern held at her side, the light of it mingling with the niche candles so that the traveller was briefly surrounded on all sides by warm gold. Then, from somewhere deep within the castle walls, somewhere above, or perhaps below, or simply elsewhere in that vast and quiet interior, came the sound of a harp. A single, unhurried phrase of notes, each one allowed to fully bloom and fade before the next arrived. The melody, if it could be called that, seemed to travel through the stone itself, arriving softened and slightly distant, the way music sounds when heard from another room through a half-closed door. "The castle keeps quiet spaces," Ilara said, beginning again to walk at her characteristic unhurried pace. "Rooms meant for nothing but rest, corners that hold warmth like a cupped hand holds water." She glanced back, and there was a gentle certainty in her expression. It knows when a tired soul has come through the door. The traveller followed, and with each step down the long, candle-lit corridor, the cold of the road became harder to remember. Ilara paused midway along the corridor, where the candlelight pooled lowest between two tall sections of shelving built directly into the stone wall. The traveller almost missed it. The door was so narrow, so flush with the wood around it, that it might have been a shadow. But Ilara pressed her fingertips lightly against a particular panel, and with the softest of clicks, it swung inward. No announcement, no flourish, only the quiet invitation of an opening door and the warm exhalation of air that came from beyond it, carrying old parchment, dried lavender, and something that reminded the traveller of candle smoke from years and years ago. The library inside was not large, but it felt bottomless. Shelves climbed every wall from floor to ceiling, disappearing into a dimness above where the candlelight could not quite reach. Tall wooden ladders leaned on brass rails, angled gently as if mid-thought. The books themselves were countless, bound in deep wine red and faded green and soft brown leather, their spines worn to velvet by many quiet hands. 2 chairs sat near the centre of the room, upholstered in deep burgundy velvet, their arms curved and low and very wide. Between them, a small table held a single candle in a glass cup, its flame barely moving in the still air. "Sit," Ilara said softly, not as a command but as an offering. The traveller settled into the nearest chair, and the cushion received them with a gentleness that loosened something in the shoulders, something in the chest. Ilara moved slowly along the nearest shelf, trailing 2 fingers lightly across the spines of a row of books. Her touch was unhurried, almost reverent. "These stories are sleeping," she said quietly, her voice pitched low as if to avoid waking them. "They are not waiting to be read. Not tonight. Tonight they simply rest here, the way a dream rests in the mind before sleep comes, full of something, still. The traveller looked at the shelves, and in the hush of the library, in the amber candlelight and the deep softness of the chair, there was, yes, something, a kind of low presence in the room, as if the books breathed very slowly. Not a sound exactly, more the memory of sound, the hum of 10,000 sentences held gently in the dark. The traveller's thoughts, which had been turning quietly since arriving at the gate, began to slow. One by one, the small, restless questions of the day, the distances, the doubts, the things left unfinished, grew lighter, softer, until they were no more pressing than the titles on unread spines. Ilara settled into the chair beside the traveller, folding her hands in her lap. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The candle between them held its single flame. The library kept its deep and comfortable silence. And it was enough. Ilara rose from her chair without a sound, the hem of her green gown settling around her like a sigh, and lifted the small brass lantern from the table beside her. She tilted her head toward the far door, an invitation with no urgency in it, and the traveller rose too, slowly, feeling the pleasant weight of the chair release them as they stood. The corridor beyond the library was long and low-ceilinged, the stone walls narrower here, and the air held a different quality, older somehow, like a room that had not needed to hurry for centuries. The traveller followed the steady amber glow of Ilara's lantern forward into the dark. And then the tapestries appeared. They hung on both sides of the corridor from ceiling to floor, vast woven panels in deep jewel tones, midnight blue, forest green, the dull red of autumn berries. Each one held a scene caught mid-breath, a river curving through silver reeds, a forest path disappearing into stitched mist, a scatter of golden stars above a sleeping valley. As Ilara moved and her lantern swept gently forward, the light rolled across the fabric in slow waves, and the scenes seemed not quite to move, but to breathe. The river shivered. The forest swayed its faint embroidered branches. The stars pulsed once softly, like distant heartbeats. The traveller slowed without meaning to. One hand drifted toward the nearest tapestry, the one with the sleeping valley, and hovered just beside the fabric without quite touching. The warmth that came from it was unexpected. Not heat, but warmth, the kind held in old wool, in quilts folded at the foot of beds, in things kept safe for a very long time. The traveller let their fingertips graze the woven border, just at the edge. Ilara glanced back, her amber eyes soft. The castle remembers every quiet footstep, she said, her voice low as the hum the books had held. They settle into the stone, into the threads. Everything peaceful that has passed through here, it stays. You can feel it, I think. The traveller could. They walked on together, unhurried, past valley and river and forest and star. At intervals, arched windows broke the tapestried walls, and through each one the moon had sent a small pool of silver light to rest upon the floor. The traveller stepped through each one in turn. cool, clean, pale as fresh linen, and each one felt like crossing a very gentle threshold, moving a little further from the ordinary world, a little further from clocks and distances and the texture of waking. Ilara did not explain each tapestry. Some things in this place simply were, and knowing them by name was not the point. The corridor curved ahead, and beyond the curve came a faint warmth and the barest ghost of something sweet drifting on the air. Ilara's lantern moved steadily forward. The traveller followed, eyes soft, feet quiet on the stone. The kitchen announced itself before they reached it. First the warmth, pressing softly against the traveller's face like a gentle hand, and then the smell. Honey slowly caramelizing, dried chamomile, something faintly spiced and indefinably comforting. The kind of scent that belonged to childhood kitchens and slow Sunday mornings, and the particular safety of being indoors while rain fell somewhere distant. Ilara pushed open a low, arched door, and the room breathed itself open around them. It was a wide, unhurried space of pale stone and dark timber, lit amber by a deep hearth fire and by several small lamps that hung at varying heights from the ceiling beams, each one glowing with the same steady warmth as Ilara's lantern. Copper pots of different sizes hung along one wall, their curved surfaces catching and returning the firelight in slow, sleepy glints. A worn wooden table sat at the centre of the room, broad and solid, its surface rubbed smooth by what felt like centuries of quiet use, scored faintly with the impressions of many ordinary meals, many unhurried evenings. Over the fire, a small pot simmered with the particular patience of something that had been tended all night. Ilara moved to it without haste, lifting the ladle and releasing a curl of sweet steam into the air. Milk, the traveller understood somehow, and honey, and herbs, lavender perhaps, and something else, something that had no name but that the body recognized immediately as kind. Ilara set a small ceramic cup on the table beside the traveller, round and smooth, deep blue as a winter night, warm to the touch before it was even filled. She poured carefully, steadily. The liquid caught the firelight as it fell. The traveller wrapped both hands around the cup and let the heat move up through their palms and into their wrists and shoulders, into the last stubborn pocket of cold that the castle's corridors had not yet reached. It loosened. It dissolved. Something in the chest settled like a stone sinking to a riverbed, slow and final, and entirely at peace. Ilara set out a small round of sweet bread on the table, soft-crusted, dense, faintly fragrant, and then sat across from the traveller in an old chair by the fire, without any ceremony at all, as though this were simply what was done here. "Every guest who has ever come through those gates," Ilara said quietly, her voice barely above the sound of the simmering pot, "has sat at this table. It is the first thing the castle offers, and the last thing it remembers." She paused, watching the fire. "You are not the first weary one to come here, and the kitchen has never once turned anyone away." The traveller took a slow sip. The warmth moved inward, all the way down, unhurried and sure, and the weight behind their eyes grew heavier in the most welcome way imaginable. The fire breathed. The castle held them close. Ilara rose from her chair without hurry, setting her hands softly on the arms of it, the way one might release something precious and unheld, and she gestured toward a narrow door at the far end of the kitchen passage.
a door the traveller had not noticed before, set so cleanly into the stone it might have been sleeping there. "There is one more thing the night would like to show you," Ilara said, her voice carrying no more weight than the candle smoke drifting overhead. The door opened inward on silent hinges. A breath of garden air moved through the gap, cool and dark and green, carrying with it the faint sweetness of damp earth and lavender. And something beneath that, older and quieter, like the smell of rain remembered rather than felt. The traveller stepped through without quite deciding to, drawn gently forward, the way one is drawn towards sleep itself. Not pulled, but welcomed.
The garden was enclosed on all sides by the castle's inner walls, their old stone softened by moss and climbing silver-leafed vines that caught the moonlight and held it. Stone paths wound through the dark in slow curves bordered by moonflowers, wide, luminous, ivory-white blooms that seemed to produce their own faint glow rather than borrow it from the sky. They did not move in the breeze, they simply shone. Ilara walked beside the traveller along one of the winding paths, her lantern dimmed to nearly nothing, and they moved through the garden in the same companionable silence they had shared in the library. The night here felt enclosed, held, not cold or exposed, but intimate, as though the sky above were a ceiling hung with soft light rather than open distance. At the centre of the garden, a reflecting pool lay still and dark. The traveller and Ilara stopped beside it together. The water held the sky with perfect faithfulness. The moon, the stars, the faint suggestion of moving cloud, all of it suspended just below the surface, patient and complete. Standing at its edge felt like standing at the edge of something vast, without any fear of it. A faint breeze moved through then, just once, lifting a thread of lavender through the air and passing on. The moonflowers did not stir. "Listen," Ilara said softly, and her voice was so low it barely parted the quiet. "The castle is resting. The garden is resting. You can feel it, I think, that slowing down. Everything here breathes together." The traveller breathed, slow and then slower still. The reflecting pool held the sky. The moonflowers glowed without effort. Somewhere far above, on the other side of the castle's high stone walls, the rest of the world continued in whatever way it did, but here it was difficult to remember quite what that meant. The traveller felt the boundary between waking and something softer grow thin as silk, and found they did not mind at all. Ilara lifted her lantern gently. "Come," she said, "there is one more room." Ilara led the way to a narrow staircase tucked behind a door so small the traveller had to bow their head to pass through it. The steps wound upward in a tight spiral, the stone worn into shallow curves by what must have been centuries of unhurried feet. The walls were close on either side, not unpleasantly so, but snug, like a seashell, like something that had been made for holding. Ilara's lantern swayed gently ahead, casting a slow pulse of gold along the curved stone, and the traveller climbed without thinking, one step and then another, the body doing the quiet work, while the mind drifted somewhere softer. The air grew cooler as they rose, not cold, simply cleaner, thinner, carrying the particular stillness of high places. Then the staircase opened. The observatory was a round room at the very top of the tower, its curved walls interrupted by 4 tall windows that stood open to the night. There was no glass, there was only the sky, and the sky was extraordinary. Stars filled every window from edge to edge, not distant and small as they so often seemed from below, but close, unhurried, burning with a steady and ancient light that felt almost generous, as though the stars had arranged themselves there on purpose for this room, for this moment. Ilara stepped to one side and held her lantern low, letting the starlight take precedence. The traveller moved slowly to the stone ledge between 2 of the open windows and rested their arms there, looking out. The night air moved just enough to be felt, a quiet current against the skin, and below the tower the silver birch forest lay still and silver pale, the castle's moonflower garden a soft glow far beneath. The world was very large and very quiet, and the traveller felt, strangely, that both of these things were a gift. "That one," Ilara said, her voice no louder than the breeze, tilting her chin toward a cluster of bright points gathered in the east. "Sailors called it the cradle. They said it watched over those who were very tired and very far from home." She paused. "They said it was the sky's way of saying, 'You may rest now.'" The traveller looked at the cradle for a long time. Their eyelids were heavy in the most pleasant way, not the heaviness of effort, but of release, of something that had been held for a long while, finally being set down. The stars did not flicker. They simply shone, steadily and without demand, and the traveller felt their breathing slow to match the vast, unhurried rhythm of the night around them. Neither of them spoke for some time. At last, Ilara touched the traveller's arm, barely, the lightest press. "There is one last room," she said softly. "The heart of the castle. It has been waiting for you." The traveller nodded, slowly, and followed her back to the stairs. The staircase curved downward in a long, slow spiral, and Ilara descended it without hurry, her lantern casting a low amber glow across the inner walls of the castle. The traveller followed close behind, one hand trailing the cool stone, each step quieter than the last. The corridor they entered at the bottom was unlike the others, narrower, older, with a ceiling so low that the candlelight seemed to pool there rather than scatter. The air held a stillness so complete it felt almost sacred, like the held breath before a piece of music resolves. At the far end of the corridor stood a great carved door. The wood was dark and deeply grained, etched with the shapes of sleeping birds nested in boughs of carved leaves. Ilara placed her hand flat against it for a moment, as if in quiet greeting, and then turned the iron handle and stepped aside. The traveller entered. The chamber was vast and soft all at once, a room that seemed to breathe. A great bed stood at its centre, framed by long curtains of pale feathers that hung from the ceiling in slow, drifting columns. They were not quite still, and not quite moving, swaying with no discernible source of air, catching the lantern light and releasing it again in whispers of gold and cream. The bed beneath them was piled with linens of a whiteness so deep they looked less like cloth and more like cloud, soft in a way that seemed almost imaginary, as though they would give way entirely beneath the lightest touch. The traveller moved toward it slowly and reached out one hand. The linen yielded with a warmth that seemed to rise from within, and something in the traveller's chest quietly undid itself. The final small knot of something they hadn't known they were still holding. They sat on the edge of the bed, then lay down. The pillow received them without resistance, and the weight of their body seemed to dissolve into the mattress like snow meeting still water. Ilara crossed the room without a sound and set the brass lantern on the low table beside the bed. Her amber eyes were gentle in the dimness. She drew the blanket up and smoothed it into place with both hands, a slow, deliberate gesture, unhurried and full of care. The feather curtains drifted closer on their own, enclosing the bed in a soft, luminous hush. Then Ilara reached down and turned the lantern's small wheel, and the light contracted to almost nothing, a barely there ember of gold that made the room feel less dark than simply hushed. "You've carried enough for one night," she said, her voice a low murmur just above silence. "Let the castle hold you now. It knows how." The traveller's eyes were already closing. Beyond the carved door, the castle breathed out, a long, slow exhalation that moved through the corridors and the library and the garden and the tower above, a sigh that settled everything into place. And the traveller slept, deeply and peacefully, and without any distance left to go.